So I have a very special guest on today. We're talking about education and teachers in particular. Before I even introduce him or myself, I want to read a quote from a teacher that I saw over the weekend. Chalice Young said this in a national publication, and I don't think I know a single teacher, and I know a lot of them, who don't feel this to some degree. Quote, "My hands are tied. I watch kids I know could be saved drop out, commit petty crimes, use drugs, and make bad choices. We could fundamentally change the lives of millions of children, but we're simply too overwhelmed to meet their needs in the way we know we should." End quote. All right. It's easy to say teachers are our heroes, first responders are our heroes, all of that. And I'm guilty of this too. There's two photographs back there that are signed. They're professional athletes. They're not teachers. Maybe they should be teachers. But I really care about this stuff. I taught a little bit on the college level, and that's nothing compared to teaching secondary education. And a lot has happened in the last 15 years, and it's swayed back and forth with regard to how the unions, the strength of the unions, how much impact they have, what public opinion is about teachers and about the unions, and a whole bunch of cities that went on strike last year. So this is a complex topic, and I want to get into it. And the nice thing is we have some time. We've got a great guest to talk about it with, because he's seen it from all sides. He has been a teacher, and then he moved up the ranks and worked at the Tennessee public schools. He actually worked for the state in designing parts of teaching for the education system. He is now the executive director of Teach for America, Chicago, Northwest Indiana. He is Aneesh Sohoni, and he's coming to me from Chicago while I am stranded out west in Arizona, gladly. How are you, my friend? Thanks for coming on and doing this today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm doing well, feel very fortunate and blessed personally, but thinking a lot about our students and our families right now and how the crisis we're in is going to impact them.
You know, in this country, especially compared to a whole bunch of other developed countries, we don't treat our teachers the same way in our culture. We do not value them in the same way. By the way, before I forget, over the last decade, the national average teacher salary has dropped 4.5%. Dropped when you account for inflation, 4.5%. And there are still teachers that are going to school every day bringing supplies. In Philadelphia, in several schools, they have to bring toilet paper. They have to bring their own toilet paper to a public school where they're devoting their career to teaching kids who are the children of other adults doing other things, and most making a lot more than you make as a public school teacher. Okay, so that's my wind up here. So we're going to talk about all this, Aneesh, but I wanted to get that out up top. Let's start with your background and where you started as a teacher, why you wanted to do it, and a little bit of your path before we get to more complex questions about the profession.
Yeah, so I was a high school English teacher in Minneapolis. I grew up in a suburb just outside of Minneapolis in Plymouth, Minnesota. And my pathway to teaching was not a linear one. In fact, when I was growing up, I thought I wanted to go to law school. Even in college, I was a political science major. But when I was in college, I really started to reflect on the story of my parents, my family's journey and history, and started to realize that it was full and rich with educational opportunity. Education was the key to my parents coming to the United States to further their education. Education was the key to them being able to get decent jobs and being able to afford a house in a really good public school system. And at the end of the day, my sister and I were very lucky and very privileged to have access to great public education. So as I started to piece that story together and understand how important education was in my family, I thought, gosh, how else better to pay it forward than to become a teacher myself? Now, I had a problem. And my problem was I was a political science major and I hadn't majored in education. And so I had to figure out a pathway to get into the classroom. I saw a sidewalk chalk sign on my college campus at the University of Minnesota for Teach for America. So I went to an informational session and learned more about it, realized it was a pathway into the classroom, and then over time realized not only is it a pathway to the classroom, but it's a pathway to impact inside the classroom and beyond. And so my time as a teacher my times as a teacher were some of the most instrumental and formative experiences. Even today, I think about my students by name as I think about decisions I make. And, the biggest thing I took away from being a teacher is that our students are incredible. They will rise to the level of expectations that you put in front of them. They will teach you a thing or two. And yet at the same time, the education system itself is not helping students or teachers be their best selves.
Let's start there. The conditions or the circumstances around teaching right now that you said are suboptimal. We'll get to Teach for America in the program and some of these other ancillary issues too. Not ancillary, they're actually central. But start right there, and not just me from the outside saying this as an observer, but you in the profession, having taught and now being an administrator of teachers all over the country, well, actually all over the region in the Midwest. Talk about those things that are holding teachers back.
Yeah, I mean, you started the segment by talking about the value of teachers. I'd expand it to the value of education. Now, when you look at the research and the data, it's actually very straightforward and clear. The teacher is the most impactful person on a young person's life outside of the family they live with. And so there's no science or data-based question on the importance of a teacher. There's very clear data and research around the importance and role of education and educational opportunity. Raj Chetty has done a lot of this work, and in his work will share that there are many inputs into a child's ability to have economic mobility, but undoubtedly education is one of those critical factors, right? So you have the research, you have the data. The challenge in terms of value is all perception based. And so most people, the average citizen in our society, perceives short term much as being more important than the long term. And so when you ask yourselves, gosh, what's the value of education to my life today and tomorrow? It's harder to come up with a tangible answer, even though they exist. When you think about what's the value of education to my livelihood long term and my ability to get out of generational poverty and create a more promising future for myself, for my family, it's hard to quantify and weigh that in your short-term actions and your desires. And so I fundamentally think, right, you even look at the presidential debates, education rarely comes up. And I think it's because people don't perceive the value of education in the way the research and the data does. And that's a thing we haven't really figured out how to communicate effectively in education.
I'm so glad that the tail end of that you talked about the debate. There is a poll done a month ago, right? We're doing this program April 7th, 2020. A month ago, CNN commissioned a poll, okay? Asked Democratic voters which candidate would best handle these issues, right? Healthcare, climate change, foreign policy, immigration. Education wasn't even asked, wasn't even asked about. And like you're saying, it's the foundation, not just for individuals' lives, but collectively for our country, right? Why do you think that this is the case even after all of the spotlight that's been put on it in the last several years? And also I want to know what you think about some of those teacher strikes, especially in Chicago last year, where teachers wanted more special education teachers, they wanted more support staff, they wanted things that were going to help them do a better job. It was hard to argue against that. Like in the public debate, it seemed, or they did an amazing job in public relations. But when I was following that strike, I thought they need these things. Now there's the other side of it in the mayor and the budget and all that. I understand, you have to negotiate. But why do you think that it's still this way outside of what you were talking about with short term versus long term?
Yeah, I mean, at the federal level, the one thing we should also all acknowledge and realize is the federal role in education is actually fairly limited. Most of the education happens locally, whether that's at a city or municipal level or at a state level, whether that's funding or even decisions that get made. So, on the one hand, it's maybe not as surprising. The downside, though, is it eliminates the ability to put this really important work on a platform
Right.
at a pedestal that matters. So I see that. I mean, this is an interesting moment in time, right? We haven't talked about COVID-19 yet. I know we will,
Yeah.
but everyone is facing the impact of school closures. It doesn't matter what neighborhood or what city you live in. Everyone's having to figure out, how do I make sure if I have young kids, they are continuing to learn. There is deep inequity within all of this, whether it's access to connectivity, access to technology and the devices you need, and then access to a rigorous remote learning plan. My biggest concern and fear at this moment in time is you're going to see inequities be exacerbated
Yeah.
because a lot of things that were true before COVID-19 are impacting how we're responding in an educational sense. And so this is going to be an interesting moment to see if education rises up on people's priority lists. The number of tweets and Facebook messages I saw in the week after schools closed, teachers should be paid $1 million because, gosh, I've done this for one day and I'm seeing how hard it is.
That's right. That's right.
And
No, go on. Sorry.
no, I'll just make one final point, which is like when people become proximate to something, right? When they actually have to experience it themselves, it totally changes their feeling and their mindset and orientation. I'll come back to that idea in the Teach for America story in a little bit, but everyone's having to manage this right now, and I wonder if this will be a moment or an opportunity for education to rise up.
You know what? It's that walk a mile in somebody's shoes before you're going to criticize them. And I think that the coronavirus, for all its horrors, and they are real, um, it's exposed some weaknesses or areas where that need improvement or that are reliant, right? That people are starting to realize, oh, all these different things are parts of the whole, and I may have taken these things for granted. When I started teaching, I kind of fell into it a few years ago at Arizona State University, and I always thought that teaching looked hard, and then I did it, and it was really hard. But those are young adults. Teaching, K through 12 is a whole different ball game. And don't you think? I'm interested in your opinion. To me, teachers are basically sharing the responsibility of raising people's children. If teachers are with children 6 to 9 hours a day, waking hours, they're with children collectively more than the parents are, even if they're good parents and attentive parents. Do you think that parents see? I don't know this at all. Do parents appreciate that?
Oh, absolutely. And look, I think one thing I'll just note on the parents front is I've yet to meet a parent who doesn't care deeply about their child's well-being and their child's access to great educational opportunity. It is also true that different family members and different parents have to take on different things for their families, right? Some parents have to work two jobs to be able to have a livelihood that supports their family. And so their economic circumstance, which again is in a large part driven by education and other factors, impacts all of that. But I share all that to say, look, I think parents deeply appreciate and understand the value of their teacher. I honestly, I've yet to meet a parent who's told me otherwise. I think the question I have is, to what extent does that belief actually translate into policies and practices that are supportive of teacher success, supportive of students and family success at a system level? There seems to be sometimes a disconnect between the two.
Yeah, I phrased that question poorly too, and it was way too broad. But when I hear certain people in the business community complain about the pension problem, and we're talking about Chicago, I'm talking specifically
Sure.
about Chicago right now. I understand the frustration. At the same time, some of these people have made a fortune while teachers are teaching their kids. Good, excellent teachers, to the extent you're lucky enough to have excellent teachers for your kids, they're doing that while we're doing all kinds of other things, right? I don't even have kids.
Yeah.
Right? That's why I have this perspective on it. Now, so talk about Teach for America. You went through the program once upon a time. You describe Teach for America and your experience, and then we'll take it from there and talk about that and public school teachers who aren't in that, and some of the pros and cons and that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me share a little bit of my experience, and I think it is some ways indicative of a experience one might go through, and I'll share more broadly about TFA. So as I mentioned, I thought I was in the law school path. I obviously had that path disrupted when I started to reflect on my family's history. But even for me, Teach for America recruits you and says, look, we want you to make a lifelong commitment to educational inequity that begins with committing to at least 2 years in the classroom. And in my head, I said, okay, I can commit to 2 years in the classroom, and then I'll go to law school. And Teach for America does this thing to you, right? The experience of teaching in a classroom, in a marginalized community, being that close to students, being that close to family members. When you work with them and you get the support from a coach on Teach for America staff to really understand how to be successful with your students, help them grow and learn academically, help them learn and grow in terms of all of the holistic needs that they may have as well. It's really hard then to turn the other way and say, gosh, I don't believe this is possible. At the same time, you encounter challenge after challenge in working in marginalized communities that impact our students. For me, when I was a classroom teacher, these challenges included the extent to which our students had access to healthy and nutritious meals, whether they had access to a living situation where they could get a good night's rest and come to school prepared to learn, right? Those things all impact education. They're not independent of that. But as I confronted those challenges and I thought about how much potential our students had, it made it impossible for me to say, I'm going to law school. It forced me and pushed me to say, I'm staying with this work. I can't go the other way. And I've decided to make a career in education as a result. This is not just a story of my story. When you look at Teach for America broadly, somewhere between 15 and 20% of people start their time with Teach for America thinking this will be something they'll do for 2 years and then go back to a different plan. But if you look on the back end, you see that 2/3 remain working in education and 85% remain working either in education or another field or sector that impacts low-income students and families. Vanderbilt did a study a couple of years ago that showed that participants of Teach for America, compared to those who were admitted but didn't do it, think completely differently about marginalized communities, the students, the families, and what they're capable of. And I think the power of our work is we get people to come in who otherwise would not have thought about a career in education, and they stay with it, and they keep doing it as teachers, as principals, and as other educators in other forms and fashions as well.
So you may have just answered this, but let me ask it in a slightly different way. So somebody I know who is teaching right now in the Teach for America program and is having, down south, is having a good experience. It's hard in the community that this young person's teaching in. She did say to me about Teach for America, it's great, but the one thing I worry about, I'm paraphrasing her, is that because of the turnover, it can make it harder to have stability in some public schools, and the way that schools having Teach for America teachers available to them obviates sometimes them hiring someone with a 4-year degree in teaching, right? And that would cost more because the school systems are strapped. And she was saying this in a constructive fashion. She was saying, I wonder, I wish there was a way that what we're doing wouldn't have that impact, because I'm in a school and I've seen what instability in a school can do to the culture, due to the teacher's ability, right, to just do a great job individually for their own students. Now, you just said that the percentages look really good in terms of people who stick with it. But to someone inside the system who notes that about Teach for America, how do you answer?
Yeah, I mean, I'll share two thoughts here. So one is, look, the education system overall, let's take Teach for America out of it for a second, especially in marginalized communities, has a teacher retention challenge. If you really dig in and think about the root cause of why that exists, it oftentimes has to do with the quality of leadership in the school, right? Is the principal somebody that you want to work for? We all want to work for bosses that motivate us, inspire us, challenge us, but have our back. The school culture and climate, right? The availability of resources, the availability of the things you need to do your work. You mentioned toilet paper in your wind up, right? Like having the basics at the very least matter a whole lot, and a lot of the situations are challenging. With that said, what we have noticed and observed is for our teachers who are working under leadership and in school buildings and environments that are conducive to teacher impact and teacher growth, our teachers stay. And in fact, sometimes they might stay longer as well. And so part of what we're after here is thinking about, which is my second point, we're not going to fix the education system with teachers alone. I know that might be a controversial statement. As I stated at the beginning, teachers are incredibly important, right? And we believe that deeply. They're the most important adult when it comes to student learning, the second most important outside of families when it comes to student success overall. And yet we know the education system also requires great principals. It requires an ecosystem of support around schools, nonprofits that are supporting schools and school systems. It requires really strong system leaders working inside of districts and charter management organizations at the state level. And so our philosophy at Teach for America is we believe we need great leadership at every level of the system if you're actually going to see the sustained and the type of progress you're hoping to see. Sometimes that might be at odds with this idea that everyone should stay in the classroom all the time. But let's be real. In any profession, people don't stay in a profession because you tell them to. They stay because you create the conditions for them to want to make that kind of an impact.
Yeah.
And in every field and sector, you need people working at all levels, right, of the system to have that impact that you're looking for. We believe that type of leadership at every level, teachers and school leaders and outside of school buildings, is going to be incredibly important if we're going to actually make the type of progress we hope to see for our students in a sustained way.
Let's talk for a second about the results that you see with Teach for America. And then I may get back to that question about politics and there's a tension there too that I know you have to deal with in your position, right? As the head of Chicago Northwest Indiana. But let's talk about the results. Many years ago, I remember the New York Times Sunday Magazine did a big feature on Teach for America. And the biggest part of it was that the organization then, this is at least 10 years ago, probably longer, it didn't assume that it was right about all its early assumptions. And it did studies of the teaching that it was doing. I think it was externally. And not only did it take into consideration this input, it changed the model of how you did things. And I thought that alone was fascinating. You don't usually get nonprofits or really anything, any type of formal system saying, well, we're going to overhaul this because we were wrong about this, and this. Right? People usually systems, institutions, people want affirmation. But Teach for America did that. So talk about in recent years the results. Why you're proud of Teach for America. Why any of the political questions that people have about Teach for America teachers, they should first know this about the successes.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'll just first mention is what you're alluding to right now. One of our core values is learn continuously. It's been part of our DNA since the beginning, and I think if I was proud of one thing, it's our core values and how we orient to this work. On learn continuously, it means we're humble. We know we're not always going to get it right. The education system is complicated and complex. Social sector issues are complicated and complex. If there were simple answers and silver bullet solutions,
Right.
we wouldn't be where we are. And so you actually have no choice if you really want to achieve your vision and your mission, but to be humble, to continuously learn and to improve your work. And so I'll start with the orientation. I am most proud of the orientation that we take to our work. In terms of the maybe outcomes you're referring to, I'll share a few. First is the impact that we have with students and families. We are arguably the most researched program when it comes to teacher efficacy that exists out there, in part because we are often criticized for our model. The good news is we have third-party research from RAND and
Right.
Mathematica that back up our efficacy, the amount of reading and math learning gains that happen in our classrooms. In Tennessee, there's a statewide report card that got propped up when I was working there. And it continues to show that Teach for America is one of the top providers of teachers in terms of the preparation and quality across the state of Tennessee on metrics that everyone is held accountable to, apples to apples, right? And so you can kind of do those comparisons. And so I am proud of the work we do with students. They do learn a great deal in our classrooms. Let's also be clear, they're first and second year teachers, right? So I'm not saying they
Sure.
are
Of
the
course.
most expert and veteran teachers, but they do a really good job. And they fill a need that oftentimes the system can't figure out on its own without Teach for America support. And I don't mean that just in terms of classrooms, but they also fill a leadership need in terms of the diversity of our core. I'm incredibly proud that our cohort of core members look like what young 20 somethings across America look like. We're on average 50% teachers of color, 50% teachers of white, which makes us one of the most, if not the most diverse prep preparers of teacher at our size and our scale in the country. And then the last thing I'll just share, among many things, is I'm incredibly proud of the scale of our network and what they are doing, right? There's some things you can measure. For example, we have over 60,000 alumni of Teach for America around the country. In
Wow.
Chicago and Northwest Indiana, that number is 3,400. And so we're really proud of the scale of leadership that we have. And then on the impact side, they're leading some of the best schools around the country and in our system locally as principals. They're doing some incredible innovative work thinking about how do you redesign learning and rethink schools. We have a number of policy leaders. I believe recently at one point we had 7 state commissioners of education were TFA alum. And you can't necessarily quantify that impact in the same way, but thinking about 7 of our 50 states being led by TFA alum is incredible. And so, look, our scale and our impact are the things I'm the most proud of. None of these would have been possible unless we were humble and oriented to continuous learning and improvement.
You know, I think it was last year, you were testifying in front of the education committees downstate in Springfield, Illinois, the capital. And I've done that too for the House Higher Education Committee for the community college stuff that I'm involved in. It can be, a little intimidating when you first do it. And I can't remember the name of the lawmaker. I think it was a Democrat, challenged you, I think, after your presentation and talked about how doesn't this cause a problem for I think was it a recruitment of public school teachers? And you answered her well. So tell folks about that. Folks that worry about the impact this might have on the public school system where they don't get Teach for America teachers, and people have invested a lot right into a formal education training. Isn't that part of what she was getting at?
Yeah, look, we don't view these as either or solutions. We think both are incredible. At the end of the day, I have yet to hear anyone prove to me or share with me that, look, you know what, we have enough great education talent in terms of diversity and quality in our system. And so we don't need Teach for America, or we don't need insert any other institution, right? So to treat these as either or propositions, I think is actually missing the point. What we believe is that we are a model into the education system. We think we're very proud of our results, as I shared earlier. And we actually think we are making the education system and the perception of the system stronger to address her criticism directly. We provide coaching and support to all of our first and second year teachers. That is high touch support. And we hear constantly from teachers that even those who went through traditional programs, gosh, I wish I had this coach with me for my first 2 years. It was one thing to do classroom-based learning. It was another thing to do student teaching. But now that I have a classroom of my own, I don't have any support outside of what my school may or may not be able to provide. And there's great variance in that. And so I'm proud that we're able to actually say great teachers deserve coaches early on in their classroom. The second thing I think we do well is, we really think about our teachers in the classroom as CEOs of their classroom. And so we orient to this as their leadership in the classroom. Their job is to co-construct a vision alongside their students, set goals with their students, and do everything they can to help their students achieve those goals. It's an incredible leadership opportunity. And you're really hard pressed if you're 22, 23 years old to find a leadership opportunity like this, right? And so it actually starts to position teaching as leadership, as opposed to teaching as something that we don't value in our country. And then the last piece I'll share is I think it's incredibly value additive to support teachers ongoing in their journey, right, as they grow as teacher leaders and as school leaders, which is something we're very proud to do. We actually think this idea of career pathways creates more prestige and more value in the teaching profession as well. Look, I think it's a both and I think we're a model, and I'm proud of what we do.
Yeah. The name of this thing is the golden mean, right? And it's about balance, and that's a great point. It's blending it, and then the politics around it. You always have to deal with that. Speaking of which, I wanted to get your opinion about a larger question. Be as objective as you can. That Waiting for Superman. Remember that documentary? That was probably 8-10 years ago now. And for folks who haven't seen it, it was very, very critical of teachers unions. And I mean, and the point was that every child should get the best teacher possible. That's not happening now. And they went through and explained how the unions are a part of it. Okay. From the perspective of this filmmaker. And I think at that time, the environment was kind of anti the unions. I think the debate was framed that way a bit, that, these teachers are just looking out for themselves. The unions aren't protecting the kids, they're protecting the teachers. The kids aren't in the union, I'm saying that's what the environment, the atmosphere seemed to be like. And it seems like that has moved back over the last several years. Even I think there were strikes in Denver, in Philadelphia, in Chicago, a whole bunch of strikes, and public opinion was, I think, from what I saw, to a large degree, with the teachers, more than it's been in the past. First of all, is that accurate? Okay, you're in the middle of it, and second of all, what are your thoughts? I mean, it's a really big, broad question, but what are your thoughts? And again, it's a balance about the power of the unions. Because a lot of the things that the teachers are fighting for, it's just like it's framed as, they want more pay. First of all, they deserve more pay. If you ask me personally, they're losing pay here if you account for inflation. But the other thing is the things they're asking for will make them better teachers. Whether it's class size or whether it's support staff or whether it's nurses in a school. What do you think? What's your opinion about how that union debate has moved over the last decade or so?
Yeah, I mean, I'll share a couple of framing thoughts first. First is a personal one, which is, for a long time, I thought one day I would run for office. Maybe I will, but I think
there's still time. You're a young man. There's still
time. But if there's one thing I've learned, I don't know if I'm cut out for politics. I'm much more about the practice of the work. But as you know, politics, and policy impact all of us. And the second thing I'll just share is, as an organization and as a representative of Teach for America, we don't take a stance on unions, right? We view our role as developing the leadership of our educators and giving them access to information in a transparent way so they can make the best and most informed decisions about what great leadership inside of education looks like. To me, this whole union question, or union TFA question, to start there, is a little bizarre because our teachers who teach in schools that are unionized are part of the union. And so we are providing members to the union. I think there are differences of opinion at times on our recruitment model, our preparation model, our coaching model. And I think those are healthy conversations to have. This is what we were talking about in terms of my testimony down in Springfield. But I think these are healthy tensions and conversations to have. In terms of the broader politics of it all, look, I think there are a set of things to know about what teacher strikes look like in this last round that you noted that were really about teacher working conditions, right? Which is a bucket of things. It can be more special education teachers, it can be more counselors, it could be access to other resources necessary to do your work well, like teacher pay. There's those things. And then there are a whole bunch of other issues that don't have to do with teacher working conditions and service to the students that can come up at times as well. I would say the ability to differentiate and distinguish between these issues when you form an opinion on what we're fighting for is important. I don't ascribe to the pro-union or anti-union rhetoric. I actually try to go deep into the issues and ask myself, is this going to be good for students or not? And if so, how can we work on the same team where it is going to be good for students? And then the last thing I'll share on this question is, I think that the more we can stay focused on practice inside the classroom, the more we can stay focused on what a school leader is doing to run an effective school building, and how are nonprofits in the public system helping that, how is the union helping that, the better we will all be. And so I've, intentionally tried to stay out of the fray on these conversations, not because they're not a part of our work. You inevitably get wrapped up in it, right? I'm not trying to, I'm not naive. But I am also intentionally trying to push a conversation about practice that I think we spend far too little time on in terms of what actually results in good outcomes for kids.
That it's a great point, and I'm so glad we talked about that practice, and then you got to explain what you guys do, why it matters, why it's valuable. I am a huge fan of Teach for America. A girlfriend of mine was in it 15, 17 years ago, and every night I wanted to hang out and do this and that, and she was banging out her lesson plans and dead serious about it and wanting to improve. Like you're saying, just wanted to develop. And I think what you're doing in making this a career, the way that you have done, is a really admirable thing. People can tell you're a true believer. And by the way, you walk the walk. You decided to do this. You decided to change your career. You decided to go in and learn about it first, then into the public side in the state of Tennessee, and now administering this program. They're lucky to have you, and I really appreciate you coming on, Aneesh.
Thank you. Yeah, and if I could just share one last thing. Look, yeah. COVID-19 is disrupting all of our lives. We should give great thanks and gratitude to everyone working on the front lines right now, especially our essential workers, those in hospitals, and those taking care of the children of those essential workers, so they can be there. I also think it's really important. I'd be remiss if I didn't close with this, to say that we have real challenges ahead of us when it comes to education and learning loss, especially in our most marginalized communities. And this idea of focusing on education right now at this moment in time, it's not necessarily going to be the emergency response we need to COVID-19, but very quickly, we're already starting to think about this. We need to pivot to asking ourselves, what are our students going to need in the near term, next school year, and beyond? Because the research is very clear that this kind of learning loss has deep implications for the long-term livelihoods of our students. This is going to change a generation. And so I just wanted to put that in there to say education sometimes may not be the role of it may not be as clear in the short term, but in the near term and beyond, we all are going to really have to think about what are we going to do to support our students, especially those from marginalized communities, because this inequity is being exacerbated.
Well, you know, and I was the one who was remiss in not asking a deeper question actually about coronavirus. And I didn't want to take too much of your time, but I'll take another question if I can get it in. So what are you guys talking about in the education community, in the secondary education community in particular, about those challenges and how to meet them? I mean, this whole thing's only been going on a month. And
Yep.
and you know, we're still not nationally shut down, but basically most of the country is shut down. Almost all the schools at this point, I think, are shut down. So how do you combat that? Even in the event that kids are back in school in the fall, hopefully.
Yeah. So look, I mentioned practice. This is all about practice, right? It's all about effective teaching and learning. A few things that we're talking about, and I'll make clear, I don't think any of us have the answers. We know what questions to ask right now, and we're working on developing the answers. One is, at Teach for America, we're asking ourselves, what does effective pre-service training look like for this next batch of teachers, given that it's unclear whether we can be in person or not with them, whether students will be doing summer school or not, and the answers could change quickly. So we're thinking a lot about pre-service training. We're thinking a lot about what coaching and development looks like. And then at a systems level, we're thinking a lot about remote learning. I think something that we are all learning is there's just wide variability in remote learning, quality and availability and access for our students. And so we all have to get ready to operate in a system where remote learning exists. And there are, in the short term, inequities that exist about who gets access to remote learning. We're also asking a lot of questions about the future of learning, right? There are going to be some opportunities that emerge from this very tragic crisis around how learning happens. Does it have to be in a physical building? Does it have to be in the four walls of a classroom, as is traditionally thought of? There are definitely some bright spots out there of schools and classrooms doing it differently. And I think we're going to learn a whole lot about what works and what doesn't in terms of delivering instruction. We just got to remember that our students today are going to face acute challenges, and so we gotta stay centered on them.
Well said. Yeah, everybody's just figuring this out as we go, you know. And when it comes to children and education, it's complicated. High stakes. You can't get the time back, and they're still developing. So it ruptures their world, not just their education. Right? There's a trauma involved. I think that's part of what you're saying. Thank you for everything you're doing at Teach for America, and I'll just say it again. Speaking for myself, I'm just so grateful for teachers in this country. It's just a really hard and noble job. And I wish it was viewed more and more that way as it is in some other countries. On that note, I appreciate you coming on the Golden Mean, Aneesh. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Talk to you all real soon.